Hello. It is me, your True Hill Phenom SP3. We are live on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter for True Heel Heat, Dark Side of the Ring, Season 3, Episode 1 review of how Brian Pillman broke wrestling's fourth wall. This is going to be a really good one. Thank you all for joining us, whether you're joining us on YouTube, Facebook, or Twitter. Please leave your thoughts on this first episode of Dark Side of the Ring Season 3 in the comments section or in the live chat if you're watching us on YouTube. Drop us a like if you're watching us on YouTube. Smash that subscribe button. Of course, you could share this video with all your wrestling fans, friends, and family on Facebook, Twitter, or any of your favorite social media platforms. And of course, hit the bell to stay notified for all the great content right here on True Hill Heat. If you're watching us on Facebook or Twitter, drop us a like, drop us a heart emoji, a laugh emoji, and angry emoji. However emotion this episode gave you, please let us know with your expressions, with your engagement. It very much helps us out on True Hill Heat, and it helps more people get this video. And of course, you could tag your friends in the live chat so they can watch along with you. But I am not alone on this edition of our Dark Side of the Ring Season 3, Episode 1 review. I am back once again. We did season 2. We started up season 2. We did season 1 on Rewind, and now we are live for season 3. She is the beautiful, the lovely princess of all the true heels, Miss Krssi Luv.
Good morning. Hello, everybody. So excited to be here for season 3, SP. This is going to be a good season. It's already starting with a bang. Already.
Starting with a bang, talking about one of the most controversial figures.
Exactly.
One of the most controversial figures in wrestling history. And we are not alone. We are joined by the man of 1,004 numbers. He is the host of Dark Power, the co-host of Fusion of Honor. He is my good brother in the Chicago area, the StatKing.
What's going on, guys? Good morning. I'm just hoping one day I can buy an $80,000 Hummer and be like Brian Pillman.
I don't think you want to be like Brian Pillman in those regards, but I mean, hey, there is a lot to unwrap on this episode of Dark Side of the Ring, but we want to know your thoughts once again. Let us know in the live chat for all of you guys watching us live. We thank you for joining us this morning. If you're watching us on Facebook, just drop us a like, drop us a heart emoji. Doesn't take too much out of your day, and it very much helps us out, so we would definitely appreciate it. But man, oh man, what an episode we saw last night, Dark Side of the Ring, Season 3, Episode 1, how Brian Pillman broke wrestling's fourth wall. Miss Krssi Luv, one word to describe your feelings watching this episode. One word, you don't have to think that much, just whatever word comes to your head.
Action.
StatKing?
Weirdly, I'm going to go with inspirational.
I like that one.
I like that. I would just say tumultuous. Tumultuous is the best word that I can think of to describe this one. This episode was narrated a lot like a lot of the episodes in season 2.
Oh, take one's back. Sorry, messy. There you go. Very messy.
You only had the most time to think of a word, so you
I know. I'm sorry.
Messy. But, this episode of Dark Side of the Ring was narrated by the first ever AEW World Champion Chris Jericho. This was another 2-hour episode with 2 parts, similar to the premiere last year with Chris Benoit. So first of all, we had to start things off. We started things off with probably the most famous talking head on this episode of Dark Side of the Ring, which was none other than Stone Cold Steve Austin. He kind of talks about meeting Brian and shows us actually the famous gold chain that Brian Pillman got him when they were teaming. He says that chain is something that he will always have and is sentimental to him. And he talks about that him and Brian were good friends and a pretty good damn tag team. We then see Jim Ross, who is described as a former WCW executive, as the guy who was really pushed to get Brian Pillman into WCW. He puts up for how athletic Brian was and how he would try anything. We then see our famous figure, the LVP of the Montreal Screwjob episode, Jim Cornette. He mentioned that Brian was someone who wanted attention and wanted to perform for people. He tells us that he and Brian were good friends in the 80s and 90s. He actually tells a real quick story about Mark Madden was great friends with Pillman, and around these parts, we wondered why Vince didn't interview him or whatnot. But we got a little bit of Cornette here, and then we saw probably who I think was one of the contenders for MVP of this episode, Brian Pillman Jr., who, looks exactly like his dad. He tells us that he is the only son of the late, great Brian Pillman. We then move back to Austin, who calls Brian the master of the promo, and we actually see one of those in ECW, and he told Joey Styles that he is running this interview. And I just got to say, the ECW footage was top-notch, some of the best stuff. But what did you think about our first batch of talking heads for this episode here, Miss Krssi Luv?
I had got chills for the first batch. I think Jim did very well when he was like talking about Brian and young time, and Steve as well. And yes, my God, his son is like spitting image, like, I mean, twins, and he's his only son, and his name is the same exact name. So of course you're going to be a spitting image of your dad. So I think it was very, very well put. Yeah, like I said, it gave me chills though. That first couple of segments, and those promos were crazy back in ECW. Good, all the footage that they put together, spot on.
Really good stuff. What about you, StatKing? Who do you think stood out from this first batch of talking heads?
I think Stone Cold has to stand out just because of the depth of connection that they had, and I think what really made Stone Cold stand out to me was throughout all of he's had an incredible career, but he made a point to say, I have not kept a lot of stuff from my wrestling days, but I kept this chain. And that alone even if nobody else, maybe we didn't have Cornette, Ross, or even, I guess Pillman Jr. to an extent, that alone would have told you how Brian Pillman touches people's lives and what he was in the industry to the people, to his peers.
And if you notice, after that, I didn't know, but Stone Cold never really wore jewelry like that, except that gold chain. It's that same exact gold chain.
Yeah.
And that's the only jewelry that he would wear. And he wore it like for a long time after his death.
Yeah, it's very true. And it definitely shows his connection to Brian Pillman for sure. Next up was one of my other we talked about, Brian Pillman Jr. standing out, Stone Cold Steve Austin standing out. But in my opinion, the person that we didn't know before this documentary that stood out the most was Brian's older sister, Linda Bryan, Linda Pillman, who we met next. She talks about Brian having a lot of issues with his throat and that he had over 40 surgery. And each time they would remove like some of like the scraping from his throat, but it would grow back. As Brian had to have an emergency tracheotomy, and the doctor's house was closer than the hospital, so the procedure was done in the middle of the night on a dining room table. The surgery didn't stop Brian from being active though, but he had to stay quiet for 2 to 3 weeks. Cornette had a great line here mentioning that he feels that Brian overcompensated years later with all the talking he would go on to do. We then met another one. I think that this is probably one of the best talking heads that we've ever had for a Dark Side of the Ring episode, because I will say once again, we have an MVP candidate when we bring in Kim Wood, who was the Cincinnati Bengals strength coach, and he talks about how tough Brian was. He talks about the tryout with Cincinnati, and he busted his ass to overcome his size. And he had a reputation as a street fighter in Cincinnati. And his sister actually tells the story of Brian hanging a guy over a railing by his ankles after a fight at a nightclub when Brian hit on his girlfriend. They then talk about after a short NFL run with the Cincinnati Bengals, Brian moved to the CFL and played for Calgary. He suffered a career-ending ankle injury and decided to try wrestling. The Heart Dungeon was in Calgary, and Brian was taken into that camp. His sister says that from what she knows of the dungeon, something is wrong if you don't hear someone scream.
Screaming. Everyone says that, yes.
JR talks about how the dungeon built a solid foundation, and it was an easier transition from football to wrestling in that way. What is your thoughts, StatKing, on Brian's transitioning from going into football, making it to the top level, to the NFL?
Right.
You're a big NFL fan, and then having to transition that into going to the Heart Dungeon to train for wrestling.
It is something that we kind of see a lot sometimes. Back in the day, especially, we saw a lot of football players who suffered injuries and had problems being able to transition to wrestling. But I don't think any of them had the natural gifts that Brian had when it came to being on the mic. And that was one of the things that separates people from, the whole, what's the Macho Man, the cream rises to the top. And with Pillman, he was able to transition a lot better than a lot of other guys just because of those mic skills. So it goes to show the intangibles are so important in wrestling. And I think that's one of the things that was kind of the hallmark of the entire episode, or talking about how you have to get yourself over. You have to be able to, it's not just a matter of playing the crowd. You got to play the whole business in some situations.
Yeah, and Brian definitely did try to do that for sure, as we'll go on to see. But what was your thoughts on Brian actually making it to the NFL and the CFL, Krssi? And was this something that you knew before this documentary?
I did not know this, and it just shows his tenacity. He was like, all right, well, he had these trials and tribulations as a child. He's overcome them. What's another thing that he can try to overcome? So it didn't work out in the NFL. Let me try wrestling, because he was tall, but he wasn't that big, so he got bigger, and they said he was always athletic. That's everyone's main thing. They all said the same thing about him. So why not use this skill somewhere else? And it just shows his tenacity. I was like, you know what, I'm gonna just use what I know and how to do it and go somewhere else and do it. So I learned. So that's why Kim sent him up to Calvary. And I think, again, didn't know any of that information, and it was just amazing to hear this about this brand.
Yes, for sure. Next, they brought in my Uncle Dave Meltzer himself, the publisher, creator of the Wrestling Observer newsletter. Him and Cornette talk about the rise of smart fans in the 80s and how they all had heard of Brian Pillman, even in his youth of his wrestling career. Dave actually takes this opportunity to push and plug his newsletter, and explains that for the longest time, it was the way to get inside news about wrestling. Although that is true, it definitely felt like a flex, I will say.
Yeah, it was.
Austin talks about the sheets and how you didn't want to get caught with them, but at the same time, nearly all the boys were reading them. Meltzer talks about his relationship with Brian and how they got together by exchanging tapes. He puts over Pillman as being a student of the game, and Jim Ross read all the good things Dave said about Brian, so he was brought into WCW. They then talk about how Brian got put into a match with Ric Flair when he came into WCW to see what the kid had, and they tore the house down. Then Rick would take Brian out to tear the house down at the local bar. Meltzer says that Brian wanted to be like Ric Flair, and Cornette put over that Brian was a great-looking guy that the woman loved. Brian's sister talks about Brian meeting Rochelle, who Brian met at a club in downtown Cincinnati. They lived together in Calgary when he went out there for the CFL, and then they moved to Atlanta when he signed with WCW. In Atlanta, his daughter Brittany was born. We then are introduced to his daughter Brittany, early day. I will say, out of all of Pillman's kids, she looks more like her mother than her father.
Dad.
But she did introduce herself as a daddy's girl, and that outside of wrestling, his kids were his life. He had thought that Brittany was his oldest daughter, but when she turned 1, he found out that he had another daughter that was 2 years older than Brittany. We actually meet that daughter, Danielle Pillman, who is another splitting image of Brian, in my opinion. She introduced herself, and she is the oldest daughter of Brian Pillman. Brian met her mother at a bar in Cincinnati, and it was a very brief love affair. Danny was born when Brian was with Rochelle, so her mom tried to keep it quiet, but a girl needs her father. Danny says that once Brian found out he was there for her 100%. And you got to give him credit for that. That's a beautiful thing to hear. So what do you guys think? First of all, let's talk about this section of the documentary. First of all, let's talk about how, what Austin Cornette, Dave Meltzer, and Jim Ross spites in the face of what WWE has tried to pretend for years, and what Bruce Pritchard tries to pretend on every episode of Something to Wrestle. That no one listens to Dave Meltzer, but Jim Ross directly quotes and says that because Dave Meltzer bigged up Brian Pillman, he signed him to WCW. Austin talks about all the boys reading the dirt sheet. So what are your thoughts on this kind of contradiction of the narrative that WWE and WWE stands and WWE employees have always tried to put out about Dave Meltzer and the Wrestling Observer? Miss Krssi Luv?
The same thing we always say, they're all fuckboys. Like they all like it's the same thing over and over and over. And everyone is not lying about the same thing. They're not gonna lie, you know what I'm saying? So it's just like you said, Bruce Pritchard's been trying to y'all know y'all read it. Like, come on, stop playing. Like, you don't have to admit it, or don't talk about it at all. But that's just.
In the famous words of Craig, in the famous words of Smokey, you don't have to lie to kick it, Craig. You don't have to lie to kick it. Come on, man. Like, I understand you want to badmouth Dave Meltzer, but when you pretend that y'all never read it or y'all don't listen to it, that's a bold-faced lie.
That's a lie.
There's so much history that says otherwise.
And then they're the ones that bring it up. No one else is like once you bring up that lie, you're doing it. So it's just like everyone is not lying about the same thing. You all do it. Just so please stop. And they probably still do it till this day.
More than likely. John, what was your thoughts on the whole Pillman, the crazy baby daddy going around having the love affair and the birth of Danielle, and then having his relationship with Rochelle, the birth of Brittany, and not finding out about Danielle until Brittany was 1 year old. What's your thoughts on that part of this story?
I mean, we all live our lives. We all have have interactions with people that we don't always know how exactly it's going to turn out. I'm pretty sure if he had known, if Danny's mother had told him that she was pregnant back when she was pregnant, he would have been there and taken care of her. But for whatever reason, she did not tell him. Maybe she didn't think that he would step up. Maybe she was concerned. Maybe she knew it was he was the father, but she saw him go to Canada, and she saw him with in a new relationship, and she said she didn't want. Maybe we don't know what she felt. Yeah. But for whatever reason, she did what she did. But the moment he found out, he did not like what he was not. I don't want to say like what he was supposed to do. He did the right thing. He did. Yeah, I guess it is. Yeah, what he was supposed to do. But he. By all these accounts, that's the one takeaway that there's always going to be there. This man loved his family.
Yep, he loved his children.
Yeah, and you got to give him credit for that, stepping up when he had to and he needed to. So, credit to him for that. Back to Brittany, who talks about the wrestling lifestyle, and she knows her dad cheated on her mom many times, which was hard for her. But she stayed with him. Rochelle had a lot of issues from what Brittany tells us, and she suffered from depression. We get a story of Brian being at a show, and Rochelle got attacked by the groundskeeper who was trying to rob her. He stabbed her several times in the face, specifically the cheek. I was just like, wow. And I think Linda was the perfect person to tell this story, which at the end she says, that will mess you up. And yes, it definitely would.
Mm-hmm.
Brian, they talk about Brian's good looks and athletic ability, giving him a solid spot on the card as a generic babyface. But
Yeah.
Brian wanted more. And Uncle Dave says that Brian saw himself as a top level guy. We are then introduced to another talking head on this documentary, former WCW president Eric Bischoff, who introduces himself and says Brian's early years in WCW were tough. They show Brian getting spiked by Sid during the War Games, which is still one of the nastiest power bombs I've ever seen in my life, and is is probably the most replayed highlight from the War Games for NXT to support their decision to not have a roof on their War Games, because Brian Pillman nearly broke his neck there. They talked about constant start and stop pushes happened because of the constant changes in management at the time that Brian was there. And then we transition into Brian getting a big break when he was booked in a tag team with none other than stunning Steve Austin. Austin says that he was not happy at all, as he was promised to get a run as the U.S. champion. He tells the story he's told countless times, so you know it's true, that Brian told him they needed to come up with a finish as they were a team. Austin was heated as he was a singles wrestler and was in line for a push. They were two singles guys who were thrown together as they didn't have any plans for either of them, so they decided to make the most of it. Austin talks about how life on the road leads to a lot of time to talk in the car, and Brian would spend the time reading dictionaries and to expand his vocabulary. Brian came up with the Hollywood Blonde's name. He says that it was used before, but how well we use it now. And Austin was cool with it. He puts over Brian for coming up with the look and everything with the team. Austin says that he loved tag wrestling once he figured it out, and Bischoff says they were made for each other. Cornette puts over that it gave Brian a chance to be a heel, and of his personality, as he liked to be a show off and a smartass, as he talked about earlier, Brian really wanting attention. So what do you think about this whole transitional period for Brian Pillman, kind of getting the start and stop pushes and then into his partnership with Austin in the Hollywood Blonde, StatKing?
I mean, that's the kind of mid-card hell that's existed for so long, but that's one of the things that helps people break out, just being able to try something different in a sense, like because you're mid-card or even lower mid-card, and it's almost as though the company doesn't care. You're able to do more. You're able to try different things and just test things out and see what works. And that's something that, really worked out well for both of them. I mean, it was kind of hilarious to see Steve with hair, but but I mean, that's a really great time for them. And it also goes to show, like, when you are on those road trips, going to make sure that you make those dates and make those towns, you can be sleeping in the car, you can be joking around, or you can be studying. And you can't, I mean, especially nowadays, it's far easier. Back in the day, you couldn't just put, a VHS into a VCR in a car, but you could read a dictionary. You could read things that would help you become better at your craft.
Yeah, and it shows how important this art and this craft was to Brian Pillman in the work that he was putting in when he wasn't on camera. Krssi, what was your thoughts on the relationship and the building of the Hollywood Blondes here, as Austin described?
Austin was very upset, but Pillman was like, "Hey man, we just gotta make the best of it. Let's do it. Let's get this popping. Like don't be mad. Let's just see what we can do." And I think that kind of like made Steve like realize, right, if I'm gonna do this, we're gonna have to do it like so we could be noticed and seen, and let's do it right. So he was like, "All right, I'm gonna follow you," which I thought was like really like cool for Steve. Just like, say, "All right, man," like he had all the ideas. I'm gonna follow this dude and see what I'm doing, because he's like, I guess what I was doing wasn't really working, so let me see what else we can do to get some heat. And it just shows like how Pillman just wanted to just be a star and just knew that he had it in him, and he just like would just do anything to make sure that people see the star in him, the star quality. So it just just shows that just gotta like give people, and like StatKing said, if you're a mid card, you have more to do. And he's studying in these car rides and on these long trips to the next show, and they got better and better. And I think that's what made them like be the heels that they were. And being annoying and like people just couldn't stand them. So
I mean, they were just great together. You could just see that they
complimented each other.
Yeah, and they were having fun together at the same time.
You know what it reminded me a lot? It reminded me a lot of Cesaro and Sheamus in the bar. WWE really had nothing for them. They put them. I mean, they started by putting them against each other, sure, but then eventually they became a team, and then they went on a pretty damn good run. With multiple title runs, and you could probably say that it helped. It helped elongate Sheamus's career because he was able to take fewer bumps with his neck problems, and it partially helped Cesaro get better and better at what it is that he needs to be able to do in WWE.
Very, very true.
Like Steve said, he said making chicken shit out of chicken salad.
Yeah, and I think the thoughts like going into the tag team, these two guys were in different points of their career,
right?
And like Austin, like he said, he was in line to kind of go up, while Brian was kind of just in this stagnant one zone. So you can understand why Brian was the one who was more enthusiastic about the team, coming up with ideas, making the most of it than Austin was, because their trajectory was totally different at that time. So we then continue on with the story, going back to more of Brian's personal life. He continues to party it up and falls for a showgirl named Melanie. He told everyone he was going to marry that girl when he saw her as a pinup in a magazine, as Kim Wood would tell us, but he was still with his wife Rochelle at the time. Melanie called the house, and that's how Rochelle found out about their relationship. Melanie became pregnant, and Brian Jr. was born, and that was what all the talking head says was the final straw, as Rochelle ended the relationship, and Brian soon after proposed to Melanie. They show home video footage of the wedding as it was in Vegas. Melanie Pillman is here finally as a talking head, and she talks about the wedding being on St. Patrick's Day, and she wouldn't change it for the world. Hearing her introduce herself as Brian's widow was really sad. I want to just say that, and you could kind of tell from this introduction as her as a talking head that this was going to get tough to watch. They talk about Brian with his kids and how he loved all of them. He was focused on providing for his kids, and eventually the Blondes were given a shot in the main event of Clash of the Champions against Ric Flair and Arn Anderson. Cornette talks about how the rating wasn't very good, and that it was actually Ric Flair's return to the ring, so a lot of people were surprised that the rating wasn't good, and Ric Flair was, of course, not going to get the blame for this, so that doomed the Hollywood Blondes.
The Blondes, yeah.
You could kind of look at it like Survivor Series 2011. I think you're familiar with this event, StatKing.
Yeah.
That event was described by WWE as not very successful as far as like buy rates and whatnot. And Rock and Cena, this was Rock's first time back in the ring. Rock and Cena was all the focus of the main event. They didn't get the blame. Truth and Miz got the blame, and that led to Awesome Truth being disbanded. So similar, we see
same thing.
Like 20 years difference that doomed the Blondes, and they were seen as a team that couldn't draw. Austin calls it betrayal, as he still wants someone to tell him why they were separated. He said, "We made chicken shit out of chicken salad." Cornette isn't sure if he's ever seen someone blamed for a rating, as TBS wasn't drawing anywhere.
Oh, Jim Cornette.
He's definitely right. Jim Cornette was on point on a lot.
He was one of my peeps for this episode, man. Him and Kim, man.
Ooh, Kim, yeah.
We talk about and then JR says that he still shakes his head as he feels that it was handled poorly, and he thinks that they could have done better. What do you guys think? Do you think that they deserved any of the blame for Clash of the Champions doing not so well? Krssi?
No, absolutely not. That I don't think that's like they're given a job. They're told what to do. They did their job. It's not on them that they didn't pull in ratings. Maybe people were tired and they were ready to go home. I don't know. Maybe the show was too long. It could be a number of things. But I don't think that they should have disbanded them and blamed them for something that they didn't have any control over.
At the end of the day, that's a good point, but they moved
back then,
on.
Yeah, they moved back then. They was like whatever.
I keep it moving. Back to his home life, as Brittany felt Melanie ran the show and treated her mom very, very poorly. Melanie was apparently very jealous of Rochelle, and his sister, Linda, says that Melanie made it hard to like her. Rochelle, they talk about disappears one day and a missing persons report is filed. Melanie says that Brian came up with the idea to file for custody during this time when she eventually came up and reappeared. She says that she shouldn't have agreed with him as it changed everything. Linda says that the custody battle started because Melanie didn't want Rochelle around and that Rochelle couldn't keep up with the money to pay for lawyers. So of course, Pillman, Brian, and Melanie would win that case. Melanie says that people should never take kids from their mother, and she would never do that again. Brittany talked about riding her bike in the front yard, and Rochelle came to see her one day when she wasn't allowed to. And when she hugged her, Brian and Melanie thought that she was trying to kidnap her. Linda says that Melanie filed kidnapping charges and Brian ended up with full custody. Brittany says that her mother was worried that she would never see her again and called to speak to Brian. However, Melanie answered the phone and apparently told Rochelle, and I quote, "Even your own mother thinks that I would be a better mother to Brittany than you would be." Rochelle called her mother directly after that and basically told her that she was going to commit suicide. Linda says that she shot herself and was taken by helicopter to the hospital, but died on the way there. Linda got stuck with having to break the tragic news to Rochelle's mother because she was the closest one to the hospital when it got there. But damn.
This was a start of the lowness coming in.
Yeah, that was.
Yes. Brian was devastated by the news as he blamed himself. He would ask Melanie if it was because of all the pressure that they put on her, and Melanie told him it probably was. Brian paid for the funeral.
Right.
Yes. Brian paid for the funeral. Yeah, she could have, try to make him feel better when he's distraught, but not Melanie. No. Brian paid for the funeral and seemed fine until the casket closed, and then he lost it and broke down in tears. Linda says that she was holding him and he was shaking as he was so basically broken up by the death of Rochelle. Melanie says that she doesn't know what her problem was back then, but she regrets everything. Nobody should lose their kids, and Rochelle wasn't abusing Brittany either. And this is when Brittany just goes off, and I don't blame her at all. She says that she lays the blame at Melanie and calls her an evil person.
Yep.
Continues by saying she is literally the devil, and she should have died years ago from all the drugs she has done, but she is going to live to be 100 and feel all the pain she has caused.
Oh, messy. I was like,
wow.
I was like, yo, they is throwing guns out in this episode. I was like, we the tea right here. Oh.
Melanie mentions that she doesn't know how to make things right with Brittany to this day.
Right, yeah.
StatKing, what was your thoughts on this whole entire story with Melanie kind of being the cause to Rochelle committing suicide?
So first and foremost, we can see that promo skills run in the family. Now, as to the actual situation, I mean, hey, they're right. If you can't pay your lawyers, they're not going to work.
Listen,
spoken as the lawyer, but yeah, this was a horrible situation, and it really goes to show. I mean, in family law, when there are problems in a family and there's just issues back and forth, you don't always realize what your words and actions mean to another person and what it means to the entire situation. And on top of that, because everybody's hurting. That's really the core of the problem. Everybody is hurting, and sometimes we lash out even though we don't realize what we're doing or what the ramifications are down the road. And I'll give Melanie a little bit of credit. Like, she she's tried to turn a page, but at the time she didn't understand what she was doing and what her effect was. And that's just, and I think the person outside of Rochelle's daughter, outside of Brittany, the person who I think I felt the worst for is Linda. Because you're not even related to the person who's passed away, but you are now given the awesome, terrible responsibility to tell this person's mother that their child not just passed away, but the manner in which they passed away.
themselves after talking to them on the phone.
That's that's because then, I mean, we're talking about, like, Brian's talking about, like, what could we have done differently. The mom now has to think, what could I was the last person who talks to her. What could I have done differently? That's incredible.
Because she called her mom on the phone and said, "Hey, I'm going to do this," and she did it. Yeah. And like you said, what could her mom have said to, like, kind of intervene or stop her? Like, I'm on my way to you. Like, don't do anything. Like, like something like that. And it's just, I guess she already had her mind made up and was just like, there's nothing more I can do, which is so sad.
And what a lot of people don't mention that, that's these times in the 90s, people didn't take mental health that seriously. And like her calling her mother and telling her to commit suicide, her mother probably reacted like, "Oh, stop playing, girl. It's going to be all right. You're going to see your daughter. You're going to get to see her. It's just a custody thing. You're going to eventually see her." But in her mind, when she's in this deep depression, and, the last thing that she heard before she talked to her mother is that her mother thinks that Melanie would be a better mother to her daughter.
Yeah.
She feels like she's never going to see her daughter again. Like, she is just broken. So you can understand how she's feeling at that time and wanting to take her life. And I think that it's great that, nowadays we know a little bit more about mental health, and, you can kind of realize what your words have such an impact on people that are suffering through this. I think it's a better understanding nowadays. But in these days, like, you can even find a little bit of sympathy for Melanie, who really didn't really realize how her words would affect someone in that way. And you can tell that she was regretful, although she is pretty much pictured, especially in this part of the story, as the villain. She is you can tell that she has very much learned from the mistakes of her life and is very
regretful. Fall from grace.
Yeah, very regretful.
Fall from grace.
Very regretful for what she has done. So we talk about, we go back to more of Brian's career, back to the wrestling business. As Brian's contract was coming up, Meltzer mentions that he and Brian would talk. Brian had 5 kids and needed to make as much money as possible. Eric Bischoff says that Brian was happy with getting back to $225,000, but wanted $400,000, and Eric couldn't get him that much. Brian and his camp decided to come up with a character to increase his value, and that leads us to the loose cannon character. I think that Kim Wood was really the ace in the hole of this whole story of what Brian's mentality was and how he was trying to, increase the way he was seen in the wrestling world to cause a bidding war between Bischoff and Vince. Kim says that they wanted Bischoff to offer him a ton, and Vince McMahon, seeing this, to then offer him more. His idea was to get someone over with this crazy character that he could play both companies against each other during this Monday Night War that was going on. His plan was as simple as more attention meant more money. Could we see a footage from Clash of the Champions in January 1996, which you can check out in our archives of True Rewind. We reviewed this entire show, and I think that this part with Brian Pillman was the highlight of the show, honestly, as Pillman is in a match with Eddie Guerrero, and he bails to the floor, and he grabs Bobby Heenan by the back. And Cornette mentions that Heenan had a bad neck, and everyone knew he was off limits. Heenan reacts immediately, blurring out the F-bomb live on TBS. It's honestly amazing to remember that moment, because I was only like 8 years old at the time, so it's crazy that this was 25 years ago. Cornette knew Pillman got gold out of the moment because he knew that everyone would be talking about the F-bomb on Turner. Next, we see Super Bowl 5, where Kevin Sullivan is versing Brian Pillman in a respect you strap match that ends abruptly after about like 2 or 3 minutes when Pillman tells Sullivan, "I respect you, Booker Man," and walks out. Again, another moment that we relived on True Rewind that you definitely need to go out of your way. Watch that episode for Super Brawl 1996. They all talk about the taboo of using that language and how nobody knew what a work was and what a shoot was. Meltzer felt Brian was heading down a bad road and was going to get fired. Cornette says that he was convincing people that he was insane. Bischoff isn't sure if anyone ever really knew if they were being worked by Brian Pillman at this time. Brian's camp said they came up with the idea that he should ask for his release and tell Bischoff that it was just an angle. It had to be a real release, though, or the office would tell Dave Meltzer it wasn't work. This is according to Dave Meltzer, of course. Bischoff gave him a real release, and Cornette and Austin are completely stunned that his plan worked. Bischoff says that it was a real release, but one with a wink and a nod, and he told Brian to go to WWF as he couldn't give him what they were offering. He promised Brian he would bring him back and would be able to pay him more, as he would be worth more after being in the WWF. And this kind of tells you the mentality of Eric Bischoff at that time. If someone came from WWF, they were going to get big money. So that's basically what Bischoff told us here. Bischoff calls out people who think Brian worked him because they talked about the character and how to make the character work in a way to end up getting more money down the road. Nobody else seems to be buying Eric Bischoff's story, though. Because
everyone said, like, again, everyone's not buying the same lie, friend. Like, hello.
Like I think Cornette put it best. He was like, Bischoff believed that him and Brian were working to create this illusion, but Brian was really working Bischoff to create his own illusion. That was the best way to describe it. Kim Wood confirms it, and Kim Wood seems like he was the closest to Brian when it comes to wrestling business. Dave Meltzer confirms this. So Bischoff, we know you're full of crap. So what were your thoughts on this whole part of Brian Pillman's story and the beginning building blocks of the loose cannon, Krssi?
I gotta learn how to make money and make it fast and make people like watch me and get people to like look at me more than the other guys. Okay, they're not giving me much to do. So all right, I'm gonna make my own type of things and make people look at me now. And now they're gonna ask about, oh, who's that guy? Like, oh, what is he doing? You know? So he had to like make his own narratives and he had to write his own story of like how he wanted things to go for himself. Because if he had to wait, if he wanted to make big money, he knew that he wasn't going to get it where he was at. So now he have to make these things happen, make people look at me, so that the other guys can say, oh, who's that guy over there? Blah, 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 blah. So he just had to make his own narrative and make his own way so that he knew how to get the money that he wanted, that he deserved.
StatKing, what was your thoughts on Pillman working Bischoff into giving him a real release?
It's fucking genius. I don't know how else to say it. That's genius. But the gamble, it's also a gamble, because you gotta look at it from Pillman's perspective. If he can't get Vince to sign him, or he can't find a way to raise his stock through this specific means, technically speaking, Bischoff released him. He doesn't have a contract. Yes, there's that wink nod thing, but Bischoff would be well within his rights to just say, no, I don't want to bring you back.
Right.
Or got, like, you know, it may not even be a Bischoff call. There may be other situations with other contracts and things like that have to be renegotiated. And that 225 that was originally available for Brian is no longer there. Right. It's not on the table. Yep. Yeah. Like this, it's a hell of a gamble, and it's an incredible way to bet on yourself. And, Kim Wood is definitely the MVP of this part.
Oh no, we didn't even get to.
Oh no,
we didn't get to the MVP quote.
Yeah. Oh no, that is hands down my favorite quote. So I can't wait till we get to that. But we'll say that Kim Wood is laying the groundwork. He's laying the groundwork.
Right. There you go. Yep.
So now, as a free agent, Brian takes control of his character and bookings. That leads to his brief run in ECW. They show his debut in the ECW arena. Again, absolutely amazing to relive this. As he compares all of the fans in the ECW arena to Eric Bischoff, calling them a bunch of calling Eric Bischoff the whole bunch of smart marks rolled into one pile of shit. Meltzer thought Brian was losing his mind. Austin says that it was amazing and he loved it. He talks about Brian trying to piss in the middle of the ECW ring. Cornette says that anytime Brian showed up, it was so different than anything else that was happening on the show. They show him wrestling a big pencil at home. Austin never once called him, even though they were close friends, to ask if it was a work because he didn't want to know, but he knew it was brilliant. Brittany talks about how fans and friends didn't know if his dad was crazy or just acting that way. Danny calls it a blur, as nobody knew what was real and what wasn't, and that was the magic of the gimmick. Dave Meltzer compares him to Andy Kaufman. JR says that the greatest wrestlers are those that are a natural extension of themselves, and that's what the loose cannon was for Brian Pillman. Kim Wood told him he needed to stop talking to Dave, as they didn't want him to lie to him about what was happening. Kim continues that real marks in this situation were Eric Bischoff and Vince McMahon, which leads to the producers asking Kim Wood what he thinks of Vince McMahon. And Kim Wood says, and I quote, "What do you do with a whore? You fuck them." That's what I thought of Vince. Wow.
Yeah, I think that's forever going to be how I now think of Vince McMahon. Especially because you guys know my stance on WWE and Vince McMahon.
But
so
for the longest now, friends. Hello.
But for somebody to just put it in a nice, succinct sentence,
yeah,
it's wonderful. It's beautiful.
Didn't even bat an eye. Same face expression at all.
He's
beautiful.
He's like it feels like he's been building to this line for years. Years. He's like, I just wanted the public setting to say this, that yes, I think that Vince McMahon is a fucking whore, and we fucked him. We fucked him with this whole Brian Pillman situation. And we would learn why he said that they fucked Vince as the story continues on. Brian's next stunt is to get Vince's attention at a convention in Vegas. Meltzer says that he was at the convention and that Brian was in full gimmick. He asked Dave for his credentials as Dave was leaving the convention to get into the building, and he walked up to JR and Vince and started complimenting Vince and going into his whole spiel. He put his arm around Vince and asked someone to take a picture, and they actually have the photo, and that is awesome. I just want to say that is awesome that they still have this photo. Vince told JR they can't hire this guy as he is crazy, and JR shoots back that he's crazy like a fox. And Vince asks, "What do you mean?" So JR explains to Vince that Brian told him what he was going to do and that he is very creative. So Vince says that, and that he says that he tells Vince that he should take a chance on him. Brian's balls that day could probably fill a wheelbarrow. It's a great quote.
Another line
in this documentary by JR. Meltzer says that Brian always felt WCW was his company as they pushed smaller guys and paid guaranteed money. So really, he just wanted to get a big money deal from WWF to cause WCW to pay him more. Kim says that it didn't matter where he ended up as it was all about the money. The only problem is man's plan, and God laughs. Another classic.
Another gem
by Kim Wood. Meltzer brings up that Brian was always about saving money for his kids, and yet bought an $80,000 Hummer. His sister says that he would use that thing to drive around traffic lights by going off the road through gullies. Melanie says that she was called and someone said the Hummer was smashed and Brian Jr.'s car seat was in the middle of someone's yard and Brian had been flown to the hospital. And that's kind of the end of this part one that was on YouTube. Linda then continues on the part two of this, says that she was told by Melanie that Brian was in an accident and it was bad. He was airlifted to University Hospital, and she was the one that had to go to the hospital once again.
Linda is the one.
First one. Melanie walked right by the room as she couldn't believe that was her husband. Linda says his hair was red from all the blood, and he was in a neck brace. His face was swollen like a beach ball, and it took 6 doctors to fix his face, as each doctor had a part of the head and face they specialized in. That's just nasty. They said that they had to cut his scalp back. His ankle was also shattered, and the decision was made to fuse it into a walking position, which meant no running or wrestling. Kim showed up and told Brian he was with him. He had a titanium mask and screws, bolts holding his leg together. When he woke up, Brian just kept telling his sister that he was really messed up, and she told him to be thankful no kids were in the car. And the producer asks Melody about the cause of the accident, and she says that Brian fell asleep at the wheel. He did go and pick up his prescription meds, and it hit him as he was driving. He drove into a tree trunk, and the Hummer was totaled. She said that it was muscle relaxers and painkillers, yet also says that there was no drug abuse or substance abuse involved here, but muscle relaxers and painkillers, yeah, there was definitely substance abuse involved here. So what was your thoughts on this whole accident and this really being a key moment in the life and career of Brian Pillman? Krssi Luv?
It just shows you, like, those, again, in the 90s, you know, certain things were not really like talked about as far as like people abusing certain things and doing things. So him driving around being reckless, and thank God none of his children were in the car, because they thought that because they saw the car seat.
Yeah.
But thank God none of the children were in the car. But this is what starts the catapult of him spiraling and doing certain things of now to that time of where, you know, and it shows like in his face and his eyes, like he was probably like not sleeping and doing certain things and just being like out of control probably. But, you know, he wanted to work, and he had a family. So I guess, you know, he's the only sole provider. So you're going to do things to make sure that they all can be, you know, taken care of. So I think is where he took too much on to himself, I believe. And that's probably why he drove and fell asleep. So it could be a number of things that like helped. But this is the start of like the whole spiraling.
StatKing, what was your thoughts on the car accident, and of course Melanie's explanation of why it happened?
If we assume for a moment that she's telling the truth and there was no drug abuse going on, this is just a really great reminder to always follow the instructions on prescription drugs.
Yes.
And when they say don't operate machinery, don't operate machinery.
Yep. It's true.
Now,
So
if there was drug abuse going on at the time, this is just like, I mean, and the fact that it involves a Hummer, it's like a quintessential 90s story. Like some famous guy on drugs driving a Hummer gets into a car accident. But I mean, it's incredible that he survived. That alone is maybe a weird advertisement for Hummers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
maybe I don't know, but yeah, incredible. Incredible that he survived that. And I think also how he's, you know, like this is kind of one of the other themes of the whole story is what Stone Cold said of, we took chicken shit and made chicken salad. Mm-hmm. Every single time he's confronted with a problem, Brian Pillman finds a way to make it work for him. And now he's in the most dire of situations. He can't do the one thing that he knows how to do incredibly well. And now he's got to find a way out of it.
Yes. And we would move on to talk about, we get a little bit of audio of Brian doing an interview. He says that he was going 70 miles an hour and instantly became Evel Knievel. He shot up in the air and it came onto his own nose first. He wasn't wearing a seatbelt and shot out of the top of the vehicle and landed 50 feet away. Brittany tells a story of having a gift to give him, and she was terrified as it didn't look like her dad. Brian Jr. has some memories of seeing the bolts holding his dad's leg together. Danny remembers him being exhausted and run down, but she was too young to understand what was really happening with him. Cornette brings up that some boys thought that it was all fabricated because of Brian's gimmick. Meltzer says that it's something Brian may have done, but he knew Kim wouldn't work him. Cornette covers the rumor that Brian was having plastic surgery to look like Shawn Michaels so he could come into WWE and face him as the evil Shawn Michaels. Apparently, the media even picked up on that rumor, and we hear Brian shooting it down as he talks about the titanium plates and swollen eyes. Dave says that Brian never lied to him except when he told him that the doctors said he could wrestle again. Dave knew the doctors told him the exact opposite. The wreck happened during Brian's negotiations with WWE and WCW, and he kept quiet how bad it was. Kim says that the object was to play Vince for money, and he did even though Brian was near death. Vince offers a 3-year deal with guaranteed money, which was less than WCW, but it had an out clause. They show Brian's press conference in the WWE as he talks about signing with the company. Pillman was still in rehab at the time, still recovering from his injuries, but the WWE was using him and his character even though he couldn't get in the ring. Austin was going to bet on Brian as once he was healed, he was going to go to the top. They showed the cool King of the Ring moment where he and Austin pass each other in the aisle. I would say, as a Hollywood Blondes fan, this is awesome, and this was great to see in WWE. Linda says that Brian would take himself off of IVs to make shows, and that was when things stopped being fun for him. Brian Jr. says that this was the beginning of the end. So yeah, this is a crazy part of it. You know, Vince offers him less money than WCW, but they did talk about how the WCW contract, they could revise it after 3 months. So it does make sense why Brian went with WWE. But what do you think about Brian actually working Vince into a contract when he can't really he can't wrestle again? What do you think about that, StatKing?
To me, it kind of shows the stupidity of Vince McMahon. Like, how do you not check up? Like, when you're in contract negotiations, you can make sure you see the medical reports. So I don't understand how he didn't know. And if he didn't know, to me, it means he didn't care. He only cared about how much money he was going to be able to make with the loose cannon character, and that just kind of goes to show that he kind of is a whore. So.
He's a whore. He's like, I'm just gonna pull my pants down because I know I can make money off of this. Krssi, what's your thoughts on Pillman being told he can't even walk but getting a contract with WWE?
Again, like StatKing, like shame on them for not even like making him like do like a physical test, like get all his information to see if he's even capable of being in a ring with all the other guys. So it's like. But, you know, Pillman being the master manipulator and being the genius that he is, no, I'm going to work this thing out so I can just, you know, get me something. As long as I can get me something, I'm good. We're going to be all right. And then, like you said, he waited the 3 months because he was trying to see what the other guys were going to give him. So, you know, I'm going to do this for right now. We do this for a little bit, see how it goes, and we go to the next one. So he had to work it out and be a manipulator and just, like, take over. And it just shows, like he said, he's a genius that was, you know, that he was.
He was definitely a manipulator, that's for sure. He manipulated the master manipulator of WWE, so he deserves credit for that. Brian struggles with his injuries and has a surgery coming up. WWE came up with an angle to get Austin some heat and play off his history with Pillman. They had a Superstars taping in Cincinnati, and Austin beats the ever-loving crap out of Pillman. Austin says that it was a stiff beating because that was the character that he was playing at the time, and had to make people care about Brian. Cornette tells the rest of the story as Austin Pillmanizes Brian's ankle with a chair, and that's how the term came came to be. I still remember this vividly. This was like, I remember when the Pillmanizing terminology came up with this. This was one of the first time that I remember really being compelled by the Steve Austin character, in my opinion.
Yeah.
They said that this was a way to write off Brian off the show so he could get the surgery. Austin says Brian took that ass whooping like a man. He knew what I needed to do, and he sold it like $1 million. Cornette says that he wasn't part of this as Austin invades Pillman's home. And yes, we probably the most famous moment of Brian Pillman's WWF career. Austin says that they always wanted to do something real and gritty. Yes, it was controversial. So they talk about Pillman. They show the footage of Pillman in his home with the ankle injury. And he says the quote, when Austin 316 meets Pillman 9mm Glock, I'm going to blast the sorry ass straight to hell. Fantastic line. This needs to be replayed for years to come. Austin breaks into the house. They didn't show the footage of Austin beating up Brian Pillman's friends outside of the house as well. Pillman threatens to shoot him, and the satellite feed cuts off. Dave Meltzer tells us that the fans weren't ready for that yet, and the reaction was negative. Dave says that he didn't like the idea, as he said it seemed really extreme, but that is the way wrestling was going. He brings up that Vince had to go on TV the next week and apologize for it, and we see footage of Vince apologizing on LimeWire with
sorry ass apology. He ain't sorry. He just had to do it because of the sponsors.
Krssi Luv, what was your reaction? Were you watching wrestling at this time? So what was your reaction during the time when they did the Pillman Austin home invasion, Pillman's got a gun angle, and what is your reaction now to that angle?
I was watching wrestling at that time, but I did not see that part until like afterwards because we had to go to bed at a certain time back in those days. So I was really, really mad when my friends was talking about it the next day at school. They was like, "You ain't see?" I was like, "No, I ain't see it." But that's why they have, well, we didn't have the internet back then like that, but they re-showed a little bit the following week. Anywho, but I did hear about it. And then it made me relive like my childhood. And I was like, oh wow, I remember I missed all that. So I got to like relive it and watch like in like real time or whatever. And then having them talk about it was even better. But it just showed you like that's when like wrestling was like starting like he was like, all right, I'm ready to push this envelope. And they wasn't like really winning in ratings like that anyway. So they had to like kind of like force themselves to like be seen. And I guess what way to be seen is we have a controversial home invasion with a gun. But that sorry apology was just horrible. Come on. He wasn't sorry.
This was in December of 1996. So, yes, WWF was getting their ass kicked in the ratings. This was in the early portion of the NWO angle. This was after Roddy Piper had returned and came to WCW. So, WWF needed to do stuff like this to kind of get the eyes back on them. StatKing, what was your thoughts on this angle? Rewatching it in this documentary and hearing the thoughts of the people around it and the negative reaction it got.
I think it was, just the way that they pulled this off. Like this man has a gun on live television. We don't know if it's loaded. We don't know what exactly the situation is. And this is a show that asks us to believe what we're watching. Yeah. That's just incredible when you think about it. And it's also, and I think the legacy of it is that WWE, you'll see no pun intended, has tried to recreate the home invasion angle multiple times. Yeah. The one that sticks out to me is Hunter coming after Randy during their feud. So you can see that they realized that this is amazing television. Just let's not use a gun next time. and that was kind of I think what Dave was saying as well. Like he thought that the angle was fine, but the gun aspect is kind of what took him out of it. And going back to it, it kind of also shows what that beating meant when Steve put that beating on Pillman. It's that, now this guy is like, I need a gun to protect myself because I can't do it on my own because look at what this guy did to me. So now I have to defend myself and he's coming here. So we're gonna shoot this guy if that's what it takes.
Oh man, just an awesome angle. Pillman was then moved to the broadcast table in the early portion of 1997 to keep him involved while he was healing. He apparently looked at it as a demotion, according to Jim Ross. He did eventually get back in the ring, but he was in constant pain. Dave Meltzer said it was sad to watch as he could have a decent match due to knowing how to work, but you knew he wasn't well. Brian told everyone he was fine as he stayed on painkillers to push through to support his family. Pillman rushed through recovery, and that didn't help how many pills he was taking. Linda mentions that Brian told her that he took enough pills until the pain went away. Meltzer says that Brian could barely walk through an airport, but yet would go out and take bumps in the ring. Austin knew he wasn't walking well, but Brian was a man's man, so you figured he would get through it. Austin had held him in such a regard that he thought he would be fine. Cornette says for some guys, they didn't know what was real and what was character. Melanie mentions they had problems and Brian wrecked a bunch of rental cards. He kept telling her that if something happened to him, she needed to go back to Atlanta and remarry so the kids had a father. Kim tells us that they grew apart due to Brian's issues and says that she saw him once with a hole in his arm from a horse needle due to Kim told him to get out of the house when he came to see him when he was in a very disheveled state. He said that his kids were upstairs and Brian wasn't welcome back in that state. JR says that friends came to him to talk about Brian and they decided to drug test him. JR says that Brian felt betrayed by him, and JR told him that all he was trying to do was save his life. Brian called Meltzer as he felt singled out, and he told Dave that all they would find was prescription drugs. The test came back, and it was prescription drugs and steroids, which nearly everyone in the company were doing at the time. So nothing was really done. Bad Blood, October 1997 comes, and they talk about the day of the event. Jim Cornette says he informs us that guys had to be at the building for a pay-per-view around 1 p.m. and some would be a little late. But it was about 5 p.m. and nobody had seen Brian, who was scheduled to be on the show against Goldust that night. Cornette calls the hotel that Brian was staying at, and the person at the front desk goes to check if Brian had checked out, and he informs Cornette that Mr. Pillman has died. Cornette initially thought it was a rib, but the guy told him that it wasn't, as the police were there. Cornette gets choked up talking about it to this day.
Yeah.
It's about he tells someone backstage to get Bruce Pritchard, and the person tells him that he's really busy.
Yeah.
It's like, Brian Pillman just died. Get Bruce Pritchard.
Get Bruce.
October 5th, 1997 is shown. Brian Pillman was found dead at 35 years old in his hotel room in Bloomington, Minnesota. Austin says that it didn't register as he honestly thought Brian's energy force could not be stopped. Melanie had the police show up to inform her that her husband was dead. Brian Jr. felt that it was a rib and he played along, thinking a camera crew was going to show up. It eventually dawned on him that his dad wasn't coming home. They show the next day, Raw announces his death again, and they do a 10-bell salute. That was when it hit Austin and he got emotional. Melanie called to talk to Owen Hart, and he told her he didn't know what happened. Vince on the phone asked Melanie if she wanted to talk and be in Brian's life. She figured the show must go on. This is another moment where Dark Side of the Ring makes Vince McMahon look like the biggest piece of shit that has ever walked the face of the earth.
They didn't make him look like a piece of shit. He
himself
was a piece of shit. They just showed us that he was a piece of shit.
Yeah, that's Melanie mentions her only request was for Vince not to ask about drugs as she didn't know the cause of death yet. Vince immediately asked about painkillers, and that is why Melanie made a face. She wishes he was there so she could slap him across the face as he promised not to ask that. This is really hard to
yeah.
Cornette despised the interview and was uncomfortable with it because he said that it was a ratings ploy. He thought Vince should have sent her a check for $100,000 and kept her off TV. Vince then has the balls to ask her if she has thought about what she is going to do now that she is a single mother of 5.
Fuck boy.
Melanie, to her credit, says that she couldn't even think much from the interview and she didn't think about not doing it. Nobody pressured her into doing it. JR says that he hated it as it was just done to pop a rating. It's just very disgusting thing.
It's very distasteful. Like the bad taste in your mouth.
So what are you guys' thoughts on Pillman's death, them finding out about it, the whole story of them finding out before the event went live for In Your House, Bad Blood, and then all the incidents that transpired the day after StatKing?
It's a pretty crazy situation. You don't like it's just one of those things that you don't know what's going to happen, and for him to go out that way. And I mean, I think what's the crazy aspect about it is how many people thought it was a work. That is just an incredible testament to how well he was able to blur the lines between work, shoot, reality, and what the business. This guy, even in death, was working people because it was them thinking it was a work and it actually was real. So he is working them into thinking that it's a work. It's a level of craziness. It's a level of insane dedication, I guess, in a weird way to the craft. But it's just your heart goes out to. During the segment, my heart went out to 2 people the most. The first is Brian Pillman Jr. When he's saying that he's thinking that cameras are going to show up, and then he realizes, no, this is absolutely real. And then the second person is Stone Cold during that 10 bell salute, because for Stone Cold to just be standing there and going, wow, like it's grief hits people in different ways at different times, and it sucks when it's live television. Like, we're live, pal. Like, you got to stand there and just realize that your friend, one of your really good friends, arguably one of your best friends, somebody who, you drove up and down around the country with for hours, this guy's sitting next to you reading a dictionary and you're like, what is he doing? And just like this level of connection that you had with somebody is suddenly gone. It reminded me of the Benoit and Guerrero dynamic and how closely they were connected and how the deaths affected each other.
Yeah.
So that was pretty crazy.
Yeah, I mean, there's a reason why this episode of Dark Side of the Ring is called "How Brian Pillman Broke Wrestling's Fourth Wall," because people, even in his death, still thought he was working. He totally got people into this inception of what was a work, what was a shoot, and he blurred the line so much that people didn't know, even in death, what if he was working or not. That's amazing. Krssi, what's your thoughts on the Vince McMahon interview with Melanie Pillman?
As I sat and watched Dark Side of the Ring, I was like, Vince McMahon has to be the biggest slime ball there is. It wasn't even a whole 24 hours. Like, she didn't even get like all the information yet. Like, she's there in 2 different towns. And you want to do an interview with me, and like she said, no one held a gun to her. But shame on Vince to even ask her to even do such a thing. Like, how? And then she said that she told him, I don't want to talk about it. And then she said she did something with her face, and it's like she remembers all of it like it was like yesterday.
Yeah. And
just shame on him to even like do, like, why like I didn't see you interview anybody else's wife. No. Why would you even do that? It's just disgusting. It's just horrible. And to ask all these questions that she didn't have answers to, it was just like really, really sad. Like, he has family, he has his children can see this. Like, this, it was very distasteful. And again, he has his own children. You didn't think all you thought about was ratings. You didn't think about family, nothing like that. I think it was really, really bad and distasteful for Vince. Like, I keep saying, he's a fuckboy.
Yes, and he keeps putting more stamps to cement himself as that boy, it seems. The producers asked Linda about the official cause of death. She mentions that it was a heart disease and that Brian got it from her father, who died of a massive heart attack at 55 years old. They talk about the funeral, and Linda says that it was just family and friends to start, and then a camera crew walks in. Linda asks who were they, who allowed them to be here, and they told her that Melanie okayed it. Linda threw them out, and of course, rightfully so. She's asked by wrestlers showing up, and she says that only Vince and JR showed up. JR says that it was an open casket and it was gut-wrenching, as that was the last time he saw Brian. He can only think this shouldn't be a part of his wrestling career, and they shouldn't be burying a guy this young with a family. Dave talks about the funeral and seeing two of the daughters running around and being told to say goodbye to daddy. Dave gets emotional talking about it. Brittany was in complete shock as she lost her mom and now her dad.
Yes.
Melanie says that she was a lost soul and has to take a break from talking about it. We then turn to Brian Jr., who says that it hurt Melanie more than anyone because that was the love of her life. Danny says that after her father passed, Melanie's true character showed. Melanie still receives royalties for Brian's legacy, and Danny says that she has never seen a dime of it. Wow. Melanie admits to spending some of the money on crazy things, but not as bad as what everyone says. Brittany mentions they went to living with running water, to living a lavish lifestyle, to running water being turned off. They went from a silver platter to not knowing when their next meal would be. Melanie says she was drinking too much, and Brian Jr. at 12 years old found her on the floor passed out from vodka. Brian Jr. Talks about his stepdad and how drugs were involved. This is where things even got heavier than everything else we talked about, because he talks about how his stepdad was a horrible man who abused Brian and would ground him for months on end and had dogs trained to keep him in his room or attack him. Brian Jr. gets choked up as he's talking about this. Honestly, I got choked up watching this part of the documentary. He says that he didn't develop socially and he never learned to throw a football or a baseball. He wasn't athletic, but was into games, and his stepdad caught onto that, and his GameCube, he sent his GameCube into a wall. Everything I latched onto was taken away from me. This was just like ridiculous.
And if you knew about GameCube was real like exclusive. Like a lot of people didn't get the GameCube back then. You know what I'm saying? Like that was something. If you had that, you was like really like cool to have the GameCube.
And his stepdad just took it away from him. So and then Dark Side of Ring did note that they reached out to the stepdad for a comment, but he never replied back. What was your thoughts on this portion, talking about the aftermath of Brian's death and how it very much negatively affected Brian Jr. StatKing?
I think that this is the way that they talk about the reversal of fortunes. It's just, I think that's probably the biggest shame. Like from all of our perspectives, we were robbed of a amazing talent. We could have seen him continue to do incredible things. His leg would have healed eventually. Like his foot would have healed. He would have been able to do more than what he was able to do by the time that his match against Goldust was supposed to happen. But removing that level of selfishness from it, this is the real tragedy of how a man who, if you think about it, everything he did, this entire character, all of it, was to play Vince against Bischoff and Bischoff against Vince to get more money for who? His family. Kids, his family. And now he's gone, and all of that is just going down the drain. All of that work. And I guess, I don't know who else to blame but Melanie. I don't like that's the thing here. Like I don't. And, that's
who gets to blame. Her. Yes, absolutely.
I mean, like I was just saying before with Steve. Like people process grief in different ways, and everybody is their own person. But you have children that you need to take care of. Like you can't you're not living for yourself anymore. And I'm not. You two are the parents here. Like I don't have any kids, but both of you know damn well you are not really living for yourself anymore. You are living to take care of your children and raise them. And this woman, I mean, you've been dealt a horrible hand, but there are ways out of this. There are ways to take care of them and do what you're supposed to do. And she just dropped that ball. Like, oh man.
It's sad. It's really sad, man.
Yes, very much sad. What was your thoughts on the stepdad's treatment of Brian Jr. here, Krssi?
Just like children don't ask to come to this world. And certain things people forget, like no matter how angry you get, it shouldn't be taken out on children or people in general. And I think, again, like back then, people didn't think at like mental issues and things and abuse in a certain way. Now it's like more, you can get more light on it now, but they were definitely abusing things. And to treat children that way, like you had dogs like train, like how do you train a dog to do such thing to a child? That child didn't do anything to you. That child didn't do not a thing to you, I'm sure. Kids can do mischievous things, they can be bad, but he didn't look like the child that was like being so disobedient that you needed a dog to stand outside his room, take his GameCube and things like that. I think this was really bad. This was the part where I was like, whew, I gotta breathe through this part of this thing, because it's like now you're talking about kids, and it's really sad. Like now he has to like relive it and talk about it, and like you can tell like the way he has to now like it changed like how he grew up. He didn't really interact with people, like it just is really it was really like sad to hear this thing, and shame on I'm sorry, but we got to put some blame on Melanie. I'm sure she said she regrets all of it now, but back then she didn't have, and she didn't. I was like, where are the people that should have been around her to help her or tell her about this? And like say, hey, what you doing, girl? Like where your friends or your family? And I guess they wasn't there around to like do that. So it was like Melanie got to take some of that blame to for what happened to her son.
Absolutely. I totally agree there. This is something that Dark Side of the Ring does very well. As you guys know, for everyone watching, thank you guys for watching. Please, in the live chat, let us know what you thought about the Dark Side of the Ring Season 3, Episode 1 premiere, or what you thought about Brian Pillman's life and career, and where he ranks among your favorites. Let us know in the live chat. But one thing we're doing the A&E biography, and something that we talked about on the Macho Man Randy Savage one in comparison to Dark Side of the Ring. The Dark Side of the Ring about Macho Man and Liz was able to, give us the bright spot and end on a more positive note, where the A&E biography tried to do that and didn't accomplish that. And this is where things kind of trying to transition into more of the bright spot of this story, as they talk about Linda Pillman, Brian's older sister, who would get all the kids together to keep them in contact every few months. Danny was living with her mother. Brittany cries talking about her aunt, as she doesn't know what she would do. Yeah, what she would do without her. In a much needed moment of levity, someone screams off camera while Linda is talking, and she laughs, as it's because there is a spider in the bathtub, and she doesn't kill anything and will take them outside to set them free. But Brian is deadly fear of spiders, so that was who was screaming.
This was so sweet. Camera. I thought that was the sweetest part. Oh my god! I was like, "Yep, Linda's she's the one."
We needed that laugh for sure. Melanie hopes her children can forgive her, but she doesn't know if that will happen. Cornette says that Brian's legacy is that he created a character that people remember today. Austin puts over the odds Brian overcame and wanted to see what the next 10 years would have been for Brian if it wasn't for that car accident. Eric says that Brian's death started a domino effect of people looking into what caused people to die so young. Cornette says the biggest legacy is what could have been. Danny says that her father saw the end goal and was close to become a megastar. Cornette thinks that he could have been up there with Rock and Austin, which is high praise. Melanie wants to have her children not be mad at her before she dies. Brian Jr. says that his dad isn't here, so he just has his mom, and he actually says that he was able to rekindle his relationship with her, and it's actually made him a better man. He is very happy. He has a parent still left on this earth, especially when you consider his sister Brittany. Like,
she does it, yeah.
Even though your mom has done a lot of evil things, like you gotta appreciate that she's still here. Austin says that he talks to Melanie every now and then, but fell out of contact with her. He then called up Brian Jr. as he found an old weightlifting belt that belonged to his dad. Brian Jr. talks about how that was like a call from the wrestling gods, and he got the itch to be a wrestler. But he says that his mother was terrified until she saw him in the ring. Brittany was also concerned, as all he ever did was sit in his room and play
video games.
He was nervous he would fall in the same issues her dad did. Cornette says that he feels Brian would be proud of his son, and that Brian's main concern would be that he's not here to look out for him. Cornette says that Brian Jr. has some guys looking out for him, though. JR tells him that the good qualities his father had, but he told him to never be a loose cannon. Brian Jr. says that his goal in all of this is to be a good father one day. They show a photo of Brian holding up Brian Jr., and he uses that photo as inspiration as he wants to hold up his son one day like that.
Beautiful picture.
Which was a tear-jerking type of like happy like moment of levity, a moment of clarity right there. And then Austin finally gets the final word on this documentary, as he loved Brian and he hoped that he thought the same about him.
Yeah.
Wow. What a crazy, beautiful, tragic story this was. And what an ending, talking about the career of Brian Jr. so far. Like, is this documentary? I feel like this documentary is just gonna make Brian Jr. One of the biggest baby faces now. Like, cause
swear to God, after we watched this, I was like, they need to be tag champs. Him and Griff. I was like, screw SCU. I remember yesterday you were saying Moxley. I was like, screw them too. I want Varsity Blondes to beat the Young Bucks. Oh man,
they'll get their turn. They'll get their turn. Yep. I think this was the best Dark Side of the Ring.
Wow.
I think this is one of the best ones. One of the best ones.
I think previously I said the best one was Owen Hart, but yeah, that I would say because of the story, which is a crazy movie-like story of his career and his life and outside of the ring, everything in between, how he looked at the business, but the talking heads as well. I think that you are definitely right, Krssi. This stands up to any of the great Dark Side of the Ring episodes from season 1 and season 2. We got Brandon Barnes in the comments in the live chat on YouTube. He says Brian Pillman was my favorite. He will be missed, and definitely he will, sir. Thank you for watching. Thank you for commenting. So we're going to start off with the StatKing. We need your MVP for Dark Side of the Ring, Season 3, Episode 1, How Brian Pillman Broke Wrestling's Fourth Wall.
This is MVP as who did the best job.
Who was the best talking head involved in the documentary?
Gotcha. Stone Cold with a honorable mention for Kim Wood.
Yeah.
That is fair. Krssi Luv?
Linda. But honorable for Kim.
I'm going to go with Kim Wood, though. I'm going to go with Kim Wood outright. That line about Vince being a whore was classic. LVP, Miss Krssi Luv.
Melanie. Sorry.
Oof. Yeah, I think I got to go with Melanie as well.
Oh, sorry.
Yes, this is an easy one, not for her contributions on this documentary, but in general, her actions in this story. Melanie is well deserving of LVP. Please, if you guys are watching on the live chat or on demand in the comment section, let us know your MVP, LVP of How Brian Pillman Broke Wrestling's Fourth Wall. Miss Krssi Luv, out of 10, what do you give Dark Side of the Ring Season 3, Episode 1?
9.
9 out of 10. StatKing?
I'm going to go with the 9 as well.
And I am going to agree with you guys and go with a 9 out of 10 for Dark Side of the Ring Season 3, Episode 1. StatKing, please tell the people as we wrap things up where they can find you on social media and the True Heel Heat YouTube channel.
You guys can catch me on Instagram, right down there on the bottom, john.petermartin89. You can always catch me on our True Heels YouTube channel covering Dark Power. I cover AEW Dark, Elevation, and NWA Power. And Fusion of Honor with my co-host, a three-time baby-making champ, Ness. We cover MLW Fusion and Ring of Honor.
Miss Krssi Luv, where can they find you on social media and the True Heel Heat YouTube channel?
Miss Krssi Luv _ or just Krssi Luv. I'm on Facebook, Twitter, and on IG.
Awesome. And you will find her on the True Heel Heat.
Yes, weekly
podcast. That drops
every week.
That drops tomorrow, and Top Guy JJ will not be with us, so we will be joined once again by the man of 1,004 numbers, the StatKing. You can find me on Twitter at TrueHeelSP3. Follow everything that I'm doing over there on the Twitter world, and you can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at True Heel Heat. This has been a great episode. I want to thank you guys for joining us. We got Brandon Barnes in the live chat. He gives it a 9 out of 10. He agrees with us. Join us back here next week as we're going to do Dark Side of the Ring Season 3, Episode 2. Should be a good one, and they have a lot to live up to after this episode. Like I said before, if you're watching us on Banan, let us know in the comments section what you thought about this episode here. Like if you're watching us on YouTube, smash the subscribe button and the bell to stay notified for all the great content right here on True Heel Heat. Give us a heart emoji, a like emoji, whatever feelings that this episode made you feel on Facebook. Drop us a like on Twitter. Let us know what you think. For Krssi Luv, who just left us, for StatKing, it is me, your True Heel Phenom, SP3. This has been Season 3, Episode 1, Dark Side of the Ring, How Brian Pillman Broke Wrestling's Fourth Wall. We are signing off until next time.